This is the Digital Agency Insiders Podcast. Inside, you'll learn how to build, grow, and scale your digital marketing agency, all from the comfort of your favorite coffee shop. Let's get started with the show.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Digital Agency Insiders Podcast. This is the podcast that gives you a little inside look into how entrepreneurs grew and built their digital marketing agencies. I am your host, Tabitha Thomas, and if this is your first time listening to the podcast, can I just encourage you to go over and hit that subscribe button, because we release new podcasts each and every Tuesday with brand new agency owners talking about the ins and outs of what it takes to start an agency, or what it takes to grow that agency over the years, and how to sustain it during times of chaos like we are going through right now in this COVID mess. So today I have with me Karl Sakas. He's the founder of Sakas and Company. Karl is a world-renowned agency consultant specializing in businesses' growing pains. He's been an agency operations director, and he's written 2 books and over 300 articles on a wide array of topics in the marketing and agency management world. He's worked with fast-growing agencies on almost every continent. Suffice it to say, he knows his stuff. Karl, welcome to the show.
Tabitha, thank you. Great to be here.
I love the intro there, and you've been quoted as saying before that you've known the difference between revenue and profit since you were 11. So have you always been interested in business? Is it something you always knew you wanted to do?
Yes. And of course, it makes more sense looking back now, but this is my 3rd business since high school. Sakas and Company is. I started as a freelance web designer in high school. I learned HTML back in the days of dial-up and started building websites. My first client actually was a small agency. So, funny how it works out. But 11. Now, that was before high school. So, most recently, before starting my agency consulting, training, and coaching business, worked in agencies in operations. So, project manager, director of client services, director of operations, doing all the stuff the owners didn't really want to do, but that had to happen. But before that, started the work doing web design. But even before that, both of my parents were career Army officers. And after they retired, they started a small real estate related business, rental property management. And they put the kids to work starting in elementary school. It turns out if you're running a family business, child labor laws don't apply. You get some sort of an exemption.
I had the same thing. My parents owned a business. If I could push a broom or empty the trash can, I had a job.
Well, I was involved in cleaning. So like tenant turnover, one tenant moved out, new tenant moved in, put the kids to work, helping out, built character, I think they said in later years. So, I would see their work. I would see them negotiating with tenants, negotiating with vendors, figuring out, what's the right balance, and talking about business. And if you look back even further, one of my grandfathers was a business professor for 40 some years. So I'd hear his stories about, flying around the world, consulting with big companies, GE, Nestle, Caterpillar, that kind of thing, about improving their employee productivity and how they worked with their employees. So business really, in a sense, this particular business, Sakas and Company, I started in 2013, but it's almost like I'm doing what I was born to do. I've created my dream situation.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it's a little bit bred into your DNA, and I'm so glad to hear that parents that own businesses are having their children help them, because I'm one of those kids too. Yeah. And I think it really has helped me have a work ethic. Like I know what it means to work and to build relationships with people. So it sounds like your story is very similar.
Exactly. Even if maybe the kids don't appreciate it at the time.
Oh, and they don't. They never do. It's child labor in those moments.
Yeah. Well, and certainly in my work with agency owners and leaders, most don't have that degree of business background, and that's okay. Like, thinking about, are you born with it, or, is it nature or nurture? You don't have to have, decades of business experience before starting your agency. You can make better choices along the way. But in general, I'm a fan of learning from others' mistakes rather than making them all yourself. You will certainly make plenty of mistakes, But for instance, I did a session recently for students at my high school. I went to a STEM magnet school, so like science, technology,
Wow.
engineering, math. More on the technology side for me. And students were saying, I'll be graduating in a year, graduating in a couple of years. Of course, go off to college. But I want to start my own business. What do you recommend? And one of the key things is work for at least one other business, work for a couple, so you can learn from their mistakes rather than making the mistakes yourself.
Yes, yes, so much yes. Go in and get a little bit of a board there of what you want to do in your own agency. So you
Exactly.
mentioned that you had a couple of businesses before Sakas and
Hmm.
Company. So
Yeah.
what led you to starting Sakas and Company?
Well, I was working at an agency at the time. I worked for one agency and then for another. And as the head of operations, I realized there was this opportunity.
Uh-huh.
As I thought about the agency owners, the owners of the two agencies I'd worked with, there were 5 owners altogether. At the first one had started in design. Another person was interested in SEO and marketing strategy. Another was interested in development. The second agency was marketing strategy and development. And I noticed that people start agencies because they love the work. Maybe they love design, maybe development, maybe strategy, something else. And often they end up bringing in, say, other freelancers to help them along the way. And suddenly, before they know it, they have an accidental agency. And, now instead of being in Photoshop or Illustrator or the development environment all day, now they're running a business. They're ordering the toilet paper or making sure that someone ordered the toilet paper. Hopefully as you delegate that as you grow. And so people were often in over their head,
Hmm.
and, realizing since then, when you're an agency owner, you often don't have anyone you can talk to. And so I decided to put all that experience together, that experience as the number 2 to the agency owners, with agency operations as a focus, that experience doing consulting and digital marketing since I was in high school, of course, the family background in terms of leadership and things like that. I decided to put that all together in 2013. I actually pitched my then boss on becoming my first client. I sent her a 2-page proposal. It was all about how she benefited from this, with one bullet about how I would benefit. And her only question was, when do you want to make the transition happen?
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Sold
So,
yourself out of a job. That's awesome.
everyone has different ways they get started. But you have to build the business that's right for you, and within agencies, in terms of the agency model, there are all kinds of options.
Yeah. So, working with those other two agencies, what are some of the things that you built up as a knowledge base that you took into the new agency? What were the things that you were looking for to pull out?
Yeah. Well, a few things. One, of course, was just the technical knowledge, right, of managing
Hmm.
projects, doing finances, interacting with clients. My client service experience was back to when I was 15 years old, right?
Yeah.
As a web designer. But one of the key things around getting experience from different businesses is you see different perspective on things. For instance, at one agency, our policy was not to charge for client service. So the idea was that if a client called, they wouldn't have to worry about getting charged for it, which is good in theory. The challenge is if you've got a particularly needy client, they're not paying for it. There's no
Yeah.
incentive for them to, get things kind of coordinated. At the second agency, everything was billed as project management for that type of work. But, in that case, account management was bundled into that. Also
Hmm.
saw differences in terms of just the size of engagement. At the first agency, typical engagements were maybe $8,000 to $20,000. Retainers were larger. The second
Hmm.
agency, our minimum for a project was $75,000. And as a PM, I was managing projects that were typically $100,000 or more.
Hmm.
And so, it was seeing a different scale of things. Sometimes when agency owners reach out and they want feedback on pricing, if we dig in on pricing, they're like, well, I'm charging this much. From their perspective, that might seem normal. But, in my case, I've seen pricing at hundreds of different agencies. I have an idea of like, does that seem high or low, or not? And part of
Yeah.
that, of course, depends on your client base. But, thinking about it, looking at pricing, looking at how you structure projects, looking at how you build the teams, pulling in different perspective there.
I like it. I like it. So now that you've had your agency and you've worked with
Mhm.
a wider range of agency owners, you're talking about the different price range and things.
Yeah.
Is there common traits that you find in agency owners? Like you can just
Mhm.
pinpoint, like you're X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, everyone's different, but I have certain models and frameworks I've built to help sort out everyone's individual circumstances to help advise them better. So, for instance, one of the key questions is where are people going with their agency? And often I'll ask people, and they haven't thought about it yet.
Hmm.
And one of the models I use, I think of it in terms of your overall trajectory. Do you lean toward running a lifestyle agency or toward running an equity agency? And lifestyle goal is to make great income, great profit margins. Your goal isn't to sell the agency. The goal is to keep running it for the foreseeable future.
Hmm.
On the equity side, and this is a continuum, most people are somewhere in the middle. They'll lean one way or the other. If they lean toward equity, their goal is to grow and sell the agency. They're not planning to keep running it forever or for the foreseeable future. And of course, people will say things like, well, I want to grow and sell, but I don't want to work 100 hours a week. Or,
Hmm.
I'm not planning to sell, but if someone showed up with, one agency owner said, a dump truck full of cash, I would sell. Now, I have to say, I've helped clients on both sides of exits, if that's their goal. Um, no one has been paid in a dump truck full of cash. I did live in New Jersey for 5 years, and I heard about the dump trucks full of cash. But I think, if these were, say, mafia connected dump trucks, there were some strings attached to the dump truck full of cash. So, but for instance, knowing which way people lean, do you lean more toward equity? Do you lean more toward lifestyle? That helps me customize. So
Hmm.
everyone has their own perspective, but they're going to be somewhere on that continuum. So knowing that is helpful. Other challenges are that people often are sucked into all of the day-to-day activities of running their agency. Now, when you get started, that is totally normal. When it's
Hmm.
you and a partner, maybe you and a few other people, it's normal to be doing a bit of everything.
Hmm.
There are 6 different agency roles that I've identified, different categories. But when you get started, you're doing a bit of everything. As
Hmm.
you grow, though, you probably don't want to keep doing everything. Now, as a consultant to agencies, I enjoy working with clients. So I don't see that going away. I'm not trying to eliminate clients from my life.
Yeah.
But in terms of agency owners, often they're thinking, how do I get the day-to-day project management, you know, off my plate? What about the
Hmm.
day-to-day account management, being the contact for everything? What a lot of agency owners will say as they move further in their business, like in the first couple of years, you're going to be doing a bit of everything. But say you're 2 years in, and you're still doing
Hmm.
everything. You're like, how do I get this off my plate?
Yeah, because
One
you can't
model.
grow if you're still doing everything yourself. There's
Exactly.
no room for
Exactly.
growth there.
I led a couple workshops at the Soda Academy, that used to be the Society of Digital Agencies in New
Mhm.
York, and was talking about leadership and agency team management. And one of the guests in the audience mentioned, if you feel like you need to be the answer person, like you need to be the one at the agency as the owner with all the answers, you're not going to grow beyond 10 people. And you know what? You don't have to grow beyond 10 people. I mean, I don't want to grow my
Yeah.
business beyond 10 people.
That goes
Just
back to the lifestyle agency. That's what you want.
exactly.
That's great. Let's
Exactly.
talk about that in that form. Yeah.
But if you want to go beyond, so in my advising, I've advised agencies anywhere from people just getting started to as many as 700 employees. Most of my clients are under 100,
Uh-huh.
but of course, things are different with 100 people versus 5 people. But regardless of where you are, if you want to grow, and if you want to extract yourself from day to day, you're going to need to find ways to do that. One
Mhm.
model I think of is sort of a shorthand. You could call it the Don or Donna Draper, thinking, from the show Mad Men.
Yeah.
That is, the owner says, I want to do sales and I want to do client strategy, and that's it. Thinking about Don Draper on Mad Men on the show, he would make the sale, Later he would swoop in for the presentation of things, and then he would leave. He would not be involved in figuring out all the details. He would not be involved in, scheduling the meeting and scheduling the follow-ups during the meeting. That's what the account team did, and traffic. So a lot of owners want what I would shorthand as the Don or Donna Draper. So that's a common situation, and there's certain stages to get there. It's not an all-at-once kind of thing. When I do coaching with clients, it takes about 18 months to go from where you are today to make yourself increasingly optional if you're trying to do it. And it depends on your team. It's not an overnight thing. I think I have an article about how do you become a strategy-first agency? And I describe it as something like 17 not so easy steps.
Not so easy. Yeah. Understatement of the year right there, right?
Yes. And indeed, that's a unique thing about my approach, which is customizing it to each client's, I call it your values, goals, and resources, your VGR, rather than saying, here's the one playbook for running your agency for everything, or like, here's the one way to do everything. Instead, I want to customize things to each agency. Whether it's consulting or coaching, or if I'm doing training, I'm talking about different things to keep in mind. Do you lean toward lifestyle or toward equity? There's not one silver bullet for everything.
So true. So true. So how are you getting in front of your potential clients in the first place? And what's their big pain point and the reason that they're coming to you? Are they searching for you? Or are you going out finding them?
Typically, my clients find me first. I do very little outbound work. I actually have a strategy for it. I describe the strategy as inbound branding. There are 3 parts: specialize, and this is one that agencies can use too if they choose. Specialize. So I only work with agencies, typically digital agencies that are independently owned, under 100 people. So specialize. Share thought leadership marketing. So I do blogging, the hundreds of blog posts on my article or articles on my website. Of course, I have other articles elsewhere as well as guest posts and so on. Podcast appearances, here we are. Public speaking, written a couple books, of course, have more in the queue, things like that, to help share free advice, high value advice. I want people at the end of reading an article to think, okay, I can do this. It's not just, here's what you could do. It's a how-to on how to actually get there. There's some concepts, but more of it's in my work is how-to. And then, you've got specialized thought leadership, and then importantly, marketing automation. If someone finds your blog post or they find your information, they hear you speak, how do you make it easy for them to hear more about you and get more valuable advice? And of course, the simplest version would be an email newsletter. But of course, you can go beyond that from a marketing automation perspective. So, I'd recommend that for agencies as well. But yeah, people find me. Someone might reach out and say, I heard you speak at such and such 2 years ago. I've been getting your emails ever since. I finally need help. Can you help me? And in that case, and if agency owners or future agency owners are listening and they're like, wow, that sounds great. It is not an overnight thing. When I launched my website in 2013, I launched it with 2 things: a contact page so people could get in touch, and a blog so that Google would start indexing things immediately. It's not an overnight thing, but there's the joke about when's the best time to plant a tree. The best time is 20 years ago. Yeah. And the second best time is today.
Right now.
So if you're not doing content marketing today, get the plan together. I have a lot of free articles about it on my website about getting started, including how to reboot the process. I'm actually working on an upcoming training about using content marketing for your own lead gen. If you recall the situation several years ago where, there were the dropped call issues with the latest iPhone at the time, and Steve Jobs basically said, you're doing it wrong, right? Hold the phone this way, not that way. It was a little silly, right? Like, surely the phone would have been designed so you don't have to hold it an exact way to avoid the dropping the calls. But if agencies are thinking, well, I've done content marketing before and it hasn't worked, you may need to shift how you're doing it. And, in the training, I'll be sharing about that. So yeah, people tend to find me. It is worth considering that there's only so much you can outsource on your own marketing. A lot of agencies struggle with the shoemaker's kids problem, right? Of, they're doing marketing or they're doing design or development for their clients and they're not doing it for themselves. No one's going to make you do it, but if you don't do it, you will pay the consequences. If you've been focused on business through referrals are great, right? And referrals from your network or from current clients, but you probably will struggle to grow solely on referrals. Often I'll hear agency owners reach out and say, I've been growing so far due to referrals, but it seems like that's drying up. My network is drying up. Sometimes that's a year into business, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it could be 5, but eventually it runs out. And it's a lot easier if you were doing ongoing marketing along the way so that you weren't solely dependent on the referrals. So I guess questions on
yeah. Gotcha. So when they come to you, what is their biggest pain point when they do come to find your agency? What is it that they're trying to accomplish by hiring you?
A few things. One that I'll hear is it feels like we've hit a plateau. We've hit a growth plateau. We can't get beyond 500,000 a year. We can't get beyond 1 million a year. Could be a higher number as well. So that's often a challenge where people have been at a plateau for several years. Another challenge is how do you get out of your day-to-day? How do you get out of being the client contact? Because, your legacy clients, the ones you've worked with since you got started, they only want to talk to you. So how do you hand that off to someone else? I will say the bad news is it's going to be hard to hand off those legacy clients. But you know what? Start by handing off your new clients so that new clients start with someone else on your team. Maybe you make the sale, and when you do the proposal, you're like, here's so-and-so. They will be your account manager. They will be taking great care of you. Maybe you're still involved in some of the strategy work, but not day to day. You need to position that at the beginning of the client relationship, not making clients think that they're going to talk to you all the time. I provide that in my consulting work, where if you're doing executive coaching, you get emergency support at no additional charge. So you have an emergency, key employee quits, key client leaves, something else happens. Part of the framework is text me or call me, and I will get back to you as quickly as possible. It might be a few hours. My record is 5 minutes. I got the text. I had an internal meeting. I stopped the internal meeting, and within 5 minutes, again, that was the record. That's not the norm. I was on the phone with the client talking them through the crisis.
Yeah.
I have clients who call me their agency therapist. I do clarify I'm not an actual therapist. You probably should have an actual therapist, but I can help you with your agency. And indeed, thinking about categories, right? Hitting a plateau or sucked into day to day, you can't get out. Another one is just looking for a sounding board, especially true if you're the sole owner of your agency. I have some info on my site about, is your spouse or your romantic partner tired of hearing you complain about the agency? Maybe it's time to get a coach.
That's so true. Yes. Because the agencies that I've worked with before have been husband and wife that work together. And that's working with family is difficult, as you know, working, with your family in the past businesses, it's difficult. So having somebody else outside is good.
Absolutely. I do clarify I'm not a marriage counselor. My focus is on agency business advice, not personal advice. I learned the hard way not to give clients personal advice. I had a client in Australia several years ago where he had hired his wife to do accounting part-time in the agency. She was not very good at it. Like at one point, the bank didn't send new credit cards. The credit cards expired, and they were a couple weeks without credit cards because, the glitch and she wasn't monitoring and this and that. So then a few months later, he said, my wife wants to go full time. What do you think I should do? And I'm thinking, not a good idea. But, I'm more diplomatic. I said, based on your agency size, you don't need a full-time accounting person. And from what you've shared about your wife before, why would you expand? Like, if you weren't married to her, you would have fired her already. Like, I'm
Uh-huh.
just thinking this is going to make it worse. And he said, well, but she won't be happy if I don't make her full time. And I'm thinking, that's why you don't hire family members. So this was my one mistake about, giving the personal advice. So I had mentioned from my own experience dating, I said, I was trying something, call it the state of the relationship meeting. It's like a business meeting for the relationship every 6 weeks. You've got a Google Doc, shared agenda, basically talk through any concerns, talk through future planning, things like that. I said, I'm thinking they need to talk. You might want to try it. I don't know. Let me know how it goes. They had a vacation coming up from Australia. They were going to go to Hawaii with their fairly newborn or infant son. And I checked in with the agency owner after they were going to have the chat and the vacation. And I asked, how did it go? And he said, well, not well. I was like, oh, no, what happened? Like, the state of the relationship. He said, well, the morning before we were going to have the state of the relationship meeting, we had an argument and she went to Hawaii with our son without me.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not how I was like, you don't have those conversations on vacation. That's the wrong thing to do. But
no. Well, they were going to have it before the vacation, and then she started the vacation early without him. Yeah. So don't hire your family members. If you're thinking about it, don't do it. It can work.
It can
work.
But you have to have very clear communications and expectations laid out on the table in the beginning and throughout their relationship.
Absolutely. Including what I describe as swim lanes. Swim lanes are useful for any agency role, but basically who's in charge of what, and especially true if you're married or in a relationship with your business partner, who's in charge of what, and if it's in their area, you can share input, but you will not question their decisions. They are the one who decides in that area. But vice versa, they shouldn't be questioning your decisions if it's in your area.
I've worked with my brother's company, his agency, for years and years and years. And I always said I'd have my hats. I'm like, I'd come in and be like, okay, my sister hat is on.
Yes.
Talk to me like you're my brother, or okay, I'm here as an employee. I would always have to say I'm switching hats now.
So it sounds like, you had good boundaries on that.
Oh, very good boundaries.
For people listening, if you have good boundaries with your family member, you could consider it, but you are likely to regret it, given my experience with hundreds and hundreds of agency owners.
It takes a lot of work to make it work.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you have agencies come to you, how does that first meeting go, where you're trying to dissect what the real issues are, what they perceive the problems to be, and what the real problems are?
Yeah. Well, so I'll do an exploratory call, which is pre-call to dig in to sort out, is it a match? But there's actually an important step I do before that. And for people listening, I would recommend doing it too. It's the idea of doing a pre-sales or pre-intake questionnaire. So this is a survey that people fill out before getting on the phone. It doesn't have to be enormously complex. Mine has 8 questions in it. It's asking things like, how did you get started and how has it turned out compared to what you thought things would happen with your agency? If you were to wave a magic wand, what's different 1 year from now? What's different 5 years from now? This helps me understand where they've been, how things are going, and where they want to go. Also asking, if you've worked with an agency consultant, coach, or other advisor before, what did you like and not like about that relationship? And other things to dig into what people are expecting. Also sharing some info about, here are the very wide ranges budget-wise for help, and certain things are custom, other things aren't. Do you have a budget in mind that you're trying to hit? Because I can do things for a wide range of budgets, but it helps to know roughly where people are coming from. So based on that pre-intake questionnaire, I usually have an 80% idea of whether someone's a match or not. I'll have some clarifying questions. For instance, someone might say in a year they want to grow. Well, okay, how much, right? If the goal is to grow 30% in a year, that's doable. If you're the agency owner in Montreal who said he wanted to grow 5x in 1 year, while also retaining all of his team and having, great team morale and employee retention, that's not going to work. That is unrealistic. So it helps me get an idea of what people's expectations are, and I can sort out, can I help them? On the other hand, if you're saying, for instance, your goal is to, triple your agency size in 3 years. Okay, that's doable. If your goal is to triple in 1 year, that's going to be tough. And it depends on your starting point, of course.
Yeah.
But, that helps. So then in the call, instead of asking all of those background questions of, well, how did you get started and how are things going and this and that, I could say, you mentioned you wanted to grow. Could you tell me more about, what is the baseline? Or it might be, for instance, increasing your profit margins. My benchmark for agency profit margins is after market rate owner compensation, that is 6-figure compensation, and reasonable team staffing and all, your net profit margins will be 20 to 30%. So if someone is saying, I want to increase my profit margins, it's like, well, okay, where are you now?
How much? Yeah.
If you're at 5%, we can get you to 20%. We're not going to get you overnight from 5 to 30%. On the other hand, remember the guy in Australia with the surprise vacation to Hawaii? When he initially reached out, he said, my net margins are 65%. Thinking, that seems high. There's something amiss. Sure enough, those were actually his margins, but he was enormously understaffed. He was trying to do all the work himself. So once he brought in additional team members, his net margins dropped within the 20 to 30% range, and he was no longer overworked. So, if your net margins are already 30% and you want to go up, I'm probably not going to be able to help you do that. And there are certain circumstances where you might, but basically want to know what I'm getting into. And if you think of asking on your pre-intake survey, if you've worked with agencies before, what did you like and not like about that experience? Well, if the prospective client has never worked with an agency before, you're going to have to train them on what it's like to be an agency client. In your onboarding process, you'll need to train them on what it's like to be your client, because they might have, some bad habits or bad experiences. But you also want to get a sense of, what was it like? For instance, as an agency project manager and then as a director of client services, we had a client who had worked with an agency before and it hadn't gone smoothly, and they had some bad things to say about the other agency. What emerged in working with them was that the common factor in the bad client relationship was them, the client, not the individual agency. So, you want to get an idea of that. The way my accountant handles that, by the way, if someone is, moving over to her for business accounting and HR services, she'll ask, in our work, I'll need to get copies of your old accounting files and documents and things like that, as part of the transition. Do you foresee any problems with me getting copies of that from your current accountant or accounting firm? If the answer is, yeah, you might have some problems getting things, she assumes they stopped paying the other firm.
Yeah.
And that's why they're leaving the other firm, and she probably does not want to work with them. So find the questions that'll help you suss things out. So do the pre-intake, do the exploratory call. Usually by the end of the exploratory call, which is mostly getting a feel for, is this a personality match? Is it a content match? Asking the clarifying questions, answering the prospective clients' questions about what it would be like to work together, often sharing some benchmarks to keep in mind. By the end of the call, usually we can figure out, does it make sense to work together? And then sort out the next steps from there. Of course, if it's a custom project, usually there'll be a follow-up call. But something to keep in mind for listeners, the bigger the client organization, the more stakeholders are going to be involved. And you have to decide which stakeholders need to be involved in the initial call and or the initial pre-survey, who needs to be involved in the second call, is there a third call, who needs to be involved in the proposal review meeting. I think a lot of people have the idea of like, well, if I work with bigger companies, I'll make more money. And that is possible, right? I mean, if you've got a client who has $100 million in revenue, odds are they're spending more money on marketing than a company with $1 million in revenue. That doesn't mean they necessarily want to spend it, though. And that $1 million company probably has one decision maker. maybe two, depending on how they're structured. The $100 million company, there could be 5 to 10 decision makers, and it's never totally clear who's in charge. You also can run into a problem that I describe as, there's a senior leader from the client team who was too busy before, but now suddenly they care about the work you're doing. They fly in, share some unappreciated feedback, and fly away, leaving you to clean up the mess and your client day-to-day contact. The technical term for that is swoop and poop. They swoop in, leave the feedback, and leave you to clean up the mess. You can fix that by doing something I call a pre-kickoff survey. With a pre-kickoff survey, once you have closed the deal, like they're now a client, they've signed the contract and they've paid. If someone hasn't paid you, by the way, they are not a client yet.
No.
Only clients must have paid you to be a client. But okay, sign the paperwork, paid the initial deposit. Send the survey around to all the key stakeholders. Is asking about how do they define success? What do things look like 2 months from now, 3 years from now? Are there any particular deliverables they're expecting? Things like that. I have another article about this on the website that digs in. So you've got that, those questions to ask. Send that pre-kickoff survey around to all of the core stakeholders, your day-to-day person, their boss. Depending on the size of the organization, maybe the CMO, if you're not working directly with them, the CEO. If it's a nonprofit, the executive director, the director of communications, maybe the director of technology if they're involved, probably board members, at least the chair of the board, maybe others. If your contact says, oh, so-and-so is too busy to fill it out, it takes 15 minutes. Like, this is not an enormously complex thing. If they're like, they don't have time to fill out, 15 minutes of info, I guarantee that person is going to swoop and poop later. It's just a question of when.
Yep.
From my experience, just a question of when. So you can use that, not just the answers, you can use their participation to predict what will happen. And as you might have guessed, I've learned this the hard way. So learn it the easy way. Do a pre-sales questionnaire, do exploratory call, make sure the right people come to the call, do a pre-kickoff.
So what do you do if you know this person has not answered and you foresee that it's going to be a swoop and poop later on?
Yeah.
How do you try to avoid it going forward from them doing that?
One would be to make the kickoff call scheduling contingent on everyone filling it out first. Okay. You don't have to. If you've got a case where there may be 3 stakeholders and you schedule the kickoff call for a couple weeks out and say, we need it by the end of this week so we can plan, for the next week. Okay, that's probably fine. But the more complex the client or the busier they are, currently, you might want to consider making scheduling the kickoff contingent on receiving the info. For instance, I'm onboarding a new executive coaching client, and part of scheduling the initial call is to sort out the initial coaching call. I need to receive the intake questionnaire and other info so that I can analyze it to create his custom coaching plan, to create the initial call agenda, things like that. So I need to know when he'll get it done before I can schedule the call. And in fact, he actually got it done the same day that I sent it to him. New record. But the good news is okay, I was confident that I would have everything I needed. I got all the inputs very quickly. And so in that case, I could confidently schedule the initial call. On the other hand, if you're working with clients that are juggling a lot of different things internally, you might need longer. So I would say make it contingent. You need it by this. It only takes 15 minutes. Yeah, people are going to have to think about it. But the actual time to do it is not very high. And then schedule the kickoff. That's something to consider. If you schedule the kickoff, and then you find you don't have everything, you might consider making the kickoff happening contingent on receiving all of the pre-kickoff surveys. You need to have told the client that, your day-to-day contact, before you reveal this. Because then in that case, they're thinking, we can't cancel this meeting. We need to get it done. We need to get it moving. And then they'll apply internal pressure on the person who's been, tardy. You can use internal client politics in your benefit because you frame it as your contact benefits from getting things done. You're basically creating incentive alignment, creating a win-win. But if you don't think ahead to doing that, it's going to be hard to do it. And then it looks like you're being mean rather than following what you said you would do 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So what does the pricing look like for working with an agency coach? I'm sure there's a wide range because you work with lots of different companies and different needs. But what does that typically look like?
So, there are a range of options. I think on my pre-intake, I note that I have solutions anywhere from $500 to $50,000 plus. And it depends.
Okay.
Big range, right?
Mm-hmm.
It depends on if you're doing a custom engagement or a more off-the-shelf agency roadmap project or executive coaching. People will typically work with me. If it's a one-off call, of course, that's it. Maybe they're doing a couple calls that might be a few weeks apart, as people are implementing things. With executive coaching, people will typically start with a minimum of 6 months, but some of the bigger turnarounds take 18 months or longer. I have some clients that I've worked with them for 4 or 5 years. The key thing is you don't have to commit up front. The idea is that it's not a lifetime commitment. So even the clients who've been doing 4 or 5 years, that's all on, whether it's a month-to-month or project basis. Usually I'll have returning clients who will prepay for the year for the tax benefit of getting the deduction at the end of the fiscal year kind of thing. So it's a pretty wide range, anywhere from $500 for a one-off call up to tens of thousands of dollars. And importantly, that's in the context of, 6 to 7 figures of impact. So sometimes people will say, well, I want to do executive coaching. It probably makes sense for them to do that in a year or two, but based on their size. Like if someone's just getting started, don't do executive coaching. Do a one-off call or two, get pointed in the right direction, and then let's talk again in a couple of years and get all of my free advice in the meantime. And I have different information products to help make things easier. For instance, just did a training, a 1-hour training on creating a client onboarding process to your agency. Spend $100 on the recording rather than doing an in-depth consultation. Use that first, or get my agency profitability toolkit. Find the right slice of things. I expect to be doing a version of this for the next 30 years or so. I have a very long-term perspective. So, if someone isn't a fit now, I will tell them that. I'd rather be known as someone who has said no to clients who aren't a good fit than someone who's, looking for a quick buck and, will take anything. And there are a lot of free resources. And indeed, for those listening, do the same thing. I have at this point approaching 400 articles on my website. So that if someone asks for help on something and they're not ready to get one-on-one support, I've got an article. I've got a few articles. The goal is to offer value rather than just try to, squeeze out every dollar.
I like it. So where can people find the articles that you're mentioning on your website? What's the web address?
Go to sakasandcompany.com. That's SAKAS. AND and the word company.com. And if you go there, you can find all kinds of articles. I'd also recommend checking out my newsletter. I share tips twice a week. More than one person has described the newsletter as one of the only emails they read every time. And in fact, I saw an update from an agency owner in Brazil earlier this year who posted on LinkedIn. And according to the translation from Portuguese in LinkedIn, he noted that he and his 2 business partners, anytime they get an email from me, they stop whatever they're doing and they spend 30 minutes discussing how they can apply what I just shared. So
nice.
I work hard to produce a lot of value in every email. So, if you visit sakasandcompany.com, you can find all kinds of free resources, sign up for the newsletter. And if you'd like one-on-one help, certainly glad to chat. If you're not a fit, I will let you know and point you in the right direction.
I like it. So how much time, I love that you're promoting your own agency, and there's so many
Mhm.
agency owners that I talk to that, like you said before, they're so busy with all of their clients, they don't take care of themselves and
Yeah.
promote themselves. And I think it's great that you do that. How much time would you say you're putting into writing articles
Mhm.
and emails and newsletters and things like that every week?
It varies by week. I'd say in general about 25% of my time. And a client had asked a couple years ago, like, oh, I love all the articles you share. Like, do you have people who help you with that? And it's like, well, sort of. So I write the articles myself.
Hmm.
He was disappointed, I think, to hear that I wasn't outsourcing, getting a ghostwriter to do things. I have team members to help in terms of, editing and proofreading and loading things in the marketing automation system and things like that. But I am writing them myself. So if you're looking for a magic bullet to just hand all of it to someone else, that probably won't work, or at least whatever they come up with is going to be fairly generic. It's not going to have your voice.
Hmm.
The world does not need another top 10 Pinterest tips. But the good news is if you listen to your clients and your prospective clients, that makes it easy to decide what to write about. The questions that I get from clients and prospective clients, those tend to make great articles. For instance, how
Hmm.
do I work fewer hours in my agency? Or, this happened with my team, what should I do? Or how should I change my team structure as I grow? If I hear a question from 2 or 3 agency owners in a week, I know that needs to be a future article. So you don't
Hmm.
have to do it all from scratch. But it does take time. If you're currently spending 0 hours a week on marketing and your pipeline is not very strong, that's probably a factor. If you're if you're already spending 5 to 10 hours a week between you and the rest of your members of the team, and leads are so, I would take a look at quality. Are you writing for a target persona? If you don't have a target persona, figure that out. I
Hmm.
believe that everything needs to be targeted to your ideal client or customer persona. So, people will say to me, I read your article about such and such. It's like you wrote it just for me. Or people will say, it's like you've been like listening, surveilling our office, listening to what we're talking about. I have a very focused target client persona, right? It's owners of an independent digital agency under 100 people. There are common challenges, right? I'm not trying to write for everyone.
Hmm.
In one case, I worked with a client who did software development, both entry level projects, $10,000 to $30,000, as well as higher end projects, $50,000 to $250,000, custom app development. And we took a look at where he was focusing, and I did some analysis. And between types of customers, anywhere from small businesses to school systems to large corporations to this and that, and if you consider there may be multiple decision makers within each type, I said, you're trying to target at least 16 different personas. It's hard enough to do two. Imagine how hard it is, there. And he was struggling with profit margins because he was trying to do everything for everyone, and his
Hmm.
marketing was struggling. And so by focusing up a bit more, he was able to improve. But you have to want to do it. If you want to focus on everyone, you'll probably struggle from a profits perspective.
Be ready to climb that mountain. That's for sure. I've been
Yes.
notorious for taking pictures of our clients and printing them off and like gluing them to the side of my screen. So when I'm emailing, I'm looking at that person. I'm like, am I
Ah,
talking to them? Am I saying what
yes.
he needs to hear? Not
Yeah,
everyone, but that one person. And
exactly.
that's how I ground myself, I guess.
Yeah.
So, the last question that I always like asking anybody that's on a podcast, is there anything currently that you are reading or listening to that's helping you grow as a person or as an entrepreneur or as an
Mm.
agency owner?
Yeah. Well, this is a classic book, one that has
Okay.
informed my leadership, management, client approach, things like that. The book is called The Human Brand. The Human Brand is by Chris Malone, who's a former Fortune 500 CMO, and Susan Fisk, who's a psychology professor at Princeton. So it's The Human Brand by
Hmm.
Malone and Fisk. And they talk about the idea of warmth and competence. And it gives you a framework for working with your clients, and also, if you're in a leadership role, for working with your team. And here's how it works. We often think about competence. Competence is, did you get the job done? Did you do what you said you would do by the deadline as described for the budget? Did you do the job?
Mm-hmm.
And that is important, right? If you're in a situation where you're working with someone who is low competence, like, your clients aren't going to be happy. Warmth is about, do you make people feel special? Do you make your clients feel special? Do you make your employees or your contractors feel special? That it's not just about work, work, work. What did you do? What did you do for me lately? So if you look at creating a high warmth and high competence experience, you'll improve your client retention. And if you apply that to your management approach, you'll improve your team retention as well. I have an article about it on my website about warmth and competence applied to agencies, but I would recommend checking out the original book, The Human Brand by Malone and Fisk, to see how you can apply it best to yourself.
I like it. Well, I can almost say that you could probably apply it to your family life as well.
Yes.
Do what you say you're going to do and be warm about it.
Exactly. Although, I've heard, if you have kids, giving them a, sort of a pre-survey before doing things may not go very smoothly.
No, not really. Not really. Having 3 kids at home, I can tell you, no, not really.
There we go.
Well, Karl, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've enjoyed getting to know you and hearing some of your insights for growing agencies. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Tabitha, thanks. And good luck to everyone.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you guys next week.
You've been listening to the Digital Agency Insiders Podcast. For more tutorials on growing your digital marketing agency, make sure to visit digitalagencyinsiders.com.